Meet the family embarrassment we have to tolerate. Margaret Carter Carter's voice cut through the warm, soft air of the Riverside Social Club in Philadelphia, like a knife through butter. Every head turned, 100 shocked eyes boring into me under the leafy canopy of the flower garden. I stood there, my heart thumping in my chest, clutching my simple beige purse as if it could somehow shield me from the onslaught of judgment. The laughter that followed was like 1,000 tiny needles piercing my skin, yet I remained composed, just as I always had. My name is Helen Foster, and at 67, I should be used to Margaret Carter's cruelty. But today, of all days, her words stung like the sharpest winter chill. It was my daughter Catherine's ceremony day, a day meant for joy, yet I felt like a ghost among the glittering crowd. My modest navy dress paled in comparison to the designer gowns swirling around me, but it was clean and pressed, appropriate for the occasion. Apparently, that wasn't enough for Margaret Carter. I cannot believe Catherine chose to marry into such ordinary circumstances, she continued, her disdain cascading down like her glass of champagne. Around her, the other women nodded, their pearl necklaces sparkling, catching the sunlight in a show of privilege. They had suggested a smaller wedding, something more fitting for our financial reality, but I could barely think through the fog of my shame. Across the terrace I saw my radiant daughter in her grandmother's gown, twirling with her new husband, James. His gaze was warm. His love for Catherine burned bright and clear. That was what truly mattered. Not the whispered insults or the veiled glances from those who thought worth was measured by their wealth and prestige. Margaret Carter Carter's unspoken demeanor had made it undeniably clear from day one. Our family was beneath her, but today was about love triumphing over judgment. Today would prove that dignity and resilience can shine brighter than any designer label ever could. The Crawfords owned Crawford Investment Partners, one of the most elite financial firms in the Southeast. Their wealth? Staggering. The kind that buys influence, silence, and a front-row seat to power. Margaret Carter. Carter moved through life like she was born with a platinum spoon in her hand. And maybe she was. But me? I was different. My name is Helen Foster, and I raised my daughter Catherine on grit, love, and carefully chosen battles. Margaret Carter never missed a chance to remind me how far we stood from her world. Whether it was subtle jabs about Catherine's humble beginnings, or pointed questions about my job at the community center, she made sure I knew where she placed me, beneath notice. "She's probably wondering how she'll afford the reception dinner," one of Margaret Carter's friends muttered loud enough for me to catch. Laughter followed, soft, cruel, dripping with entitlement. I sipped my punch slowly, just as I'd taught Catherine when dealing with difficult people. Be calm, stay dignified, don't give them the satisfaction. What they didn't know, what none of them saw coming, was that their little game of cruelty was about to hit a wall. Because while Margaret Carter flew off to Europe and filled closets with labels, I invested. Quietly, carefully, every dollar saved, every penny reinvested. While she spent for show, I built something real. And now, standing here under Riverside Social Club's sparkling lights, surrounded by fake smiles and designer dresses, I finally felt peace. Because today wasn't about status. It was about love and respect. And maybe, just maybe, about showing some old money snobs exactly what real strength looks like. She had even suggested I might be more comfortable skipping the reception altogether, though Catherine had firmly refused that suggestion. "Mother Thompson, you look lovely," Catherine had whispered to me during the ceremony, squeezing my hand. She had started calling me that after the engagement, wanting to honor both her new family and her roots. It was one of many small gestures that reminded me why I had worked so hard to give her the foundation for a good life. James had tried to warn me about his mother's sharp tongue. "She means well," he had said during our first awkward family dinner 6 months ago. "She's just protective of our family's reputation." I had smiled and nodded. understanding that he was caught between loyalty to his mother and love for my daughter. It wasn't his fault that Margaret Carter viewed kindness as weakness and humility as shame. The wedding had been beautiful despite Margaret Carter's constant criticisms during the planning process. She had questioned every choice from the flowers to the music to the guest list, always with the underlying message that our preferences were somehow inadequate. When Catherine chose to wear my mother's pearl earrings instead of the diamond set Margaret Carter had offered, Margaret Carter had sighed dramatically and muttered something about sentimental over sensible. Now, as I watched the woman who would soon be sharing holidays and family gatherings with us, I wondered if she would ever see past her own prejudices. The guests around her were hanging on every cutting remark, clearly entertained by her performance at my expense. But I had learned long ago that dignity came from within, not from the approval of people who measured worth by material possessions. The humiliation reached its peak when Margaret Carter decided to make her cruelty even more public. She tapped her champagne glass with her wedding ring, calling for attention from the entire reception. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret Carter's voice sliced through the clinking of champagne glasses, echoing off the glittering walls of the Riverside Social Club. She stood tall, an embodiment of entitlement, her expression radiating the pleasure of a cat toying with its prey. "I'd like to take a moment to welcome our new family member." The air thickened with anticipation. All eyes turned to me, Helen Foster, the unsuspecting target. I felt a rush of panic as Catherine and James halted their dance, their faces betraying a mix of concern and hope. Would this be a moment of kindness? Fat chance. I squared my shoulders, knuckles white, bracing for impact. "Helen Foster has joined our family today," she continued, her words dripping with condescension. "And while we come from very different circumstances—" The tension thickened. The crowd tittered, caught in Margaret Carter's cold grip. Each word was a dagger, expertly aimed at my dignity. I could see pain ripple across Catherine's face, her joy tarnished by the day's harsh reality. Margaret Carter widened her artificial smile, savoring the moment. "We understand that not everyone can afford the finer things in life." The room blurred around me. Those words cut deeper than I could admit. She was branding me a charity case. The audience, divided between discomfort and amusement, seemed to swirl as I fought back tears. At that moment, a flicker of recognition danced in my eyes. This was far from our first encounter. The years of her calculated cruelty rushed back. Margaret Carter's disdain wasn't just about class differences. It was personal, festering, and silent. A tremor coursed through my hands, revealing wounds I thought I had buried. As she continued, "It takes true character to maintain dignity when struggling financially." The chandelier overhead dimmed, casting shadows that seemed to taunt us all. Did she even hear her own cruelty? I glanced at James, whose arm was wrapped protectively around Catherine, murmuring something, perhaps hope or an apology. What was a daughter to feel when love was overshadowed by judgment? "Margaret works as a nurse. Such noble, humble work." Each syllable dripped with insincerity. I fought the urge to confront her, to demand the respect I had earned. The question hung in the air. When would my worth be seen beyond this twisted lens? But I wouldn't let her win. In the depths of that humiliation, I grasped my dignity like a lifeline. I was more than a job title or income. I was a mother, a woman resilient in her fight against societal judgment. With a calm I barely felt, I prepared to rise above the criticism. This was not merely about class or social status. It was about proving that true worth doesn't come from wealth, but from love, kindness, and the strength to stand tall against the shadows of scorn. The spotlight may have been on me, but my true power was just beginning to unfold. The clinking of champagne glasses faded into silence. The scent of rain hung in the air, sharp and electric, like the hush before a storm. All eyes locked on Helen Foster. Whispers crackled like leaves underfoot. Margaret Carter's poised smile froze. Her glass trembled mid-air, caught between elegance and collapse. Kenneth stood stunned, his voice thin but clear. "You're MT, aren't you?" Helen didn't flinch. She'd carried this secret for 3 long years, ever since Catherine brought James home. The moment she heard the name Crawford, she knew her world could unravel. She thought it would never come to this. But Kenneth stepped forward, eyes wide with realization. "Those quarterly reports," he muttered more to himself than anyone. "Thompson Holdings. You've been our silent partner all along." A gust swept through the open terrace doors, fluttering tablecloths like ghosts. $25 million. Injected quietly, invisibility preserved. For a price. Margaret Carter's breath hitched. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice cracked like dry porcelain. Kenneth turned to her slowly, horror dawning behind his gaze. "She saved us," he said, voice hollow. "All this time, it was her." The breeze stilled. The guests held their breath. What happens when the woman you mocked owns your survival? When pride blinds you to kindness? Margaret Carter's world tilted. Behind her polished heels lay exposed truth. No curtain thick enough to hide it now. The investment agreement specifically states that MT maintains controlling interest, Kenneth continued, his voice growing stronger as the full weight hit him. 48% ownership of Crawford Investment Partners, with veto power over major business decisions. He looked around at the stunned guests, many of them clients, some friends, all now seeing her in a new light. "She's not just an investor," he said, voice trembling slightly. "She's our primary stakeholder." Whispers erupted like matches struck in dry grass. The same people who minutes before had laughed at Margaret Carter's outdated dress, her quiet demeanor, now questioned everything. A woman dropped her wine glass. It didn't shatter, just rolled silently across the marble floor. Margaret stood still, breathing evenly, watching the ripple of shock spread through the room. Margaret Carter's composure cracked. Her lips trembled. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said, voice rising, desperate. "Kenneth, tell them." Kenneth only stared, pale, silent. "It's not a mistake," Margaret finally spoke, calmly, clearly. The time for hiding was over. She opened her simple beige purse and pulled out a worn leather portfolio. Not flashy, just real. Thompson Holdings has been the primary financial backer of Crawford Investment Partners since March 2022. Gasps, stares, silence. Kenneth nodded slowly, throat tight. "We were 3 weeks from bankruptcy," he admitted. "Our client base had shrunk by 60%. Fines pending, foreclosure looming." His eyes met hers. "Margaret saved us. Our firm, our employees, our family." Margaret Carter swayed slightly like a statue losing its foundation. The scent of rain still lingered in the air, sharp and grounding. No storm came, but the reckoning had already arrived. In the opulent Riverside Social Club, Margaret Carter felt the weight of Margaret Carter's scorn like a chain around her neck. The scent of expensive perfume and the chill of crystal chandeliers hung in the air. Just 6 months ago, she had found herself trapped in a pit of condescension. "Do you even belong here, Margaret?" Margaret Carter's words, sharp as daggers, echoed in her mind. The memory flooded back uninvited, igniting that familiar chill. Each word dripped with disdain, a reminder of every classist snicker that shredded her dignity. Fast forward to this moment, and the tension was palpable. Margaret Carter's voice, the same biting tone, sparked Margaret's resolve. "This isn't just about business, Margaret Carter," she said, the steel in her voice both surprising and thrilling. "This is about the truth." The whisper of rustling leaves from outside became a backdrop to her defiance. Kenneth, visibly shaken, tried to regain control. "The quarterly reports show steady growth," he stammered. Faces turned. Curiosity mixed with disbelief filled the room. Miss Thompson's investment saved us." Margaret Carter's composure cracked at those words, desperation spilling out. Why didn't she say anything? Keep it secret? "Because," Margaret replied, calm amidst the storm, "the agreement included a confidentiality clause. You wanted discretion." A heavy silence fell, the realization weighing down the atmosphere. The guests sensed the unraveling of Margaret Carter's facade, their whispers crawling through the air like restless phantoms. "Margaret Carter," Kenneth whispered, voice breaking, "do you even grasp what's happening? She can withdraw her investment at any time." 90 days, Margaret Carter repeated, the cold grip of humiliation tightening around her. You could almost hear the leaves settling as the reality of the moment settled in, stark and unrelenting. Would she cling to her privilege or recognize the strength of an underestimated woman standing tall? The air in the Riverside Social Club felt heavy, thick with tension and the scent of expensive perfume. Outside, a faint breeze carried the earthy rustle of leaves, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Just moments ago, Margaret Carter had commanded the room, the elite hanging on her every cutting remark. Now, all eyes were on Helen Foster, not with pity, but with awe. "Helen," Kenneth said, his voice softer now, careful now, "I owe you an apology." Margaret Carter's lips trembled. Her champagne glass, once raised in mockery, now sat abandoned, trembling beside it. "You see," Helen continued, her voice steady like a heartbeat, "your sister spent months pretending I didn't exist, pretending people like me didn't matter." A pause, a breath, the kind that lingers too long. "But I've always mattered." One guest shifted, another whispered into their sleeve. Margaret Carter's composure cracked wider, revealing something raw beneath, the certainty that power could vanish overnight. Kenneth tried again. "Helen, please understand. Margaret Carter didn't know about your investment." "And if she had?" Helen asked, her eyes locked on Margaret Carter's. "Would she have been kind then?" Silence swallowed the room. The truth wasn't just financial. It was human. Margaret Carter exhaled sharply. "There's been a misunderstanding." "No," Helen said. "There hasn't." She turned, her heels clicking softly against polished marble. Not fleeing, not begging, just walking away from cruelty and toward peace. What would Margaret Carter do next? Try to speak? Try to stop her? No one moved. They just watched her leave. And for the first time in years, Helen Foster smiled. Not at them, but for herself. "If we had known, if you had known, you would have treated me with the respect that money commands," I said, cutting him off. "But respect shouldn't be conditional on wealth, should it?" I let that question hang in the air for a moment. "Your sister didn't mock me because she thought I was poor. She mocked me because she thought she could get away with it." Margaret Carter finally found her voice again, though it came out as a desperate whisper. "I was just trying to welcome you to the family. Sometimes my words come out wrong when I'm nervous." "You called me a family embarrassment," I said clearly, ensuring everyone present could hear. "You suggested I was struggling financially and needed your charitable assistance. You made my daughter's ceremony day about your supposed superiority over someone you considered beneath you." I paused, letting the words sink in. None of that was nervous chatter, Margaret Carter. That was calculated cruelty. The guests were now openly staring at Margaret Carter, their earlier amusement replaced by uncomfortable recognition. Several country club members were whispering among themselves, and I could see at least 3 couples preparing to leave early. Margaret Carter's social performance had backfired spectacularly, revealing her character in the harshest possible light. "What can we do to make this right?" Kenneth asked desperately. "Surely we can work through this misunderstanding." "This isn't a business negotiation, Kenneth," I said firmly. "This is about how your family chooses to treat people they believe have less power than they do. You can't negotiate your way out of character flaws." Margaret Carter made one final frantic attempt to regain control. You have to understand, Margaret. I've been under so much stress planning this wedding. I wanted everything to be perfect for James and Catherine. Sometimes when I'm anxious, I say things I don't mean. The wedding planning stress made you call me an embarrassment in front of 100 people? I asked, raising an eyebrow. The sharp scent of gardenias still lingers in Helen's memory. Thick, cloying, like wealth itself. She can feel the humidity rising off the flower garden terrace, the whisper of wind through leaves. And then Margaret Carter's laugh. Cold, cutting, crystal clear. I love what you did with the thrift store special, Margaret Carter had said loud enough for others to hear. Very authentic. That wasn't a slip. That was a strike. A pattern. And Helen knew it. Her hands shake now, not from fear, but from the weight of all those moments before. The sidelong glances at Riverside Social Club, the hushed tones behind her back, the unspoken rules she never agreed to. She remembers standing there, dressem wrinkled, heart pounding, yet somehow finding the strength to smile anyway. Not out of submission, out of defiance, because dignity isn't given, it's claimed. And that day, that was the day Helen decided. Who decides who I am? Them or me? Not Margaret Carter. Never Margaret Carter. The breeze shifts, bringing the faint rain scent from the storm approaching downtown Philadelphia. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs. Another world keeps turning, unaware. But here, on this patch of earth soaked in humiliation and self-respect, everything changed. Would you have stood tall if they looked right through you? Helen did. And maybe that's why, years later, when Margaret Carter tried to apologize, tried to spin cruelty into nerves, Helen saw the truth beneath. You think stress made you say those things? Helen asked, eyes steady. Or did stress finally give you permission? Margaret Carter faltered. There it was. No remorse, just regret. Caught. Would you call someone an embarrassment because of stress? Or because deep down you believed you could? Helen let that hang, just like she once had. Around them, guests shifted uneasily. Some checked their phones. Others stared into their drinks. No one spoke, but they heard. They always do. Kenneth stepped forward, palms up. We value our relationship, he pleaded. This doesn't reflect us. Oh, Helen said softly, almost kindly. Didn't it? Hadn't it always? When your sister humiliates someone publicly, who does that really belong to? Whose name gets tarnished? And more importantly, what happens when that same person refuses to stay silent? That's when respect stops being begged and starts being earned. How would you have treated Catherine's mother for the rest of your life? The question hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Margaret Carter's face, streaked with tears, told the story no words could hide. She would have kept going, pushed harder, said worse. Why? Because she believed she could, that her name, her wealth, her world gave her the right. The grand reception, the flower garden glowing under string lights, the clink of champagne glasses, it all blurred into the background as Helen stood there, unshaken. Margaret Carter had chosen to strike in public, so Helen would respond the same way. Kenneth stepped forward, voice tight. We should talk about this privately. No, Helen said, calm and clear. You made this about status, about shame, in front of everyone. Around them, guests held their breath. Some fumbled for phones. Others just stared. She pulled out the portfolio, slowly, deliberately. These papers, she said, lifting the agreements, kept your business alive. $25 million. Signed, sealed, hidden, until now. Margaret Carter's lips trembled. Not from sadness, from shock, from being seen. Helen didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. This investment saved your family, she said. Not just once, repeatedly. Gasps rippled through the crowd. And I have full rights, Helen added, turning the page, including termination and veto power. Silence. Just the rustle of leaves outside, the distant hum of a city that keeps moving, even when moments like this stop time. Margaret Carter had spent years looking down, judging, cutting, belittling, and today, Helen didn't just look back, she rose, not with anger, but with truth. Would you keep shaking hands with someone who twisted yours behind your back? Helen already knew the answer, and so did Margaret Carter, especially now. The papers trembled in her hands, not from fear, but from the weight of everything they revealed. Margaret signed. Each stroke of the pen felt final, felt right. Margaret Carter watched, poised, perfect, untouchable, until that moment fractured. Her lips parted. The sharp scent of her perfume filled the room, but something else seeped in. Sourness. Defeat. "You think you've won?" Margaret Carter hissed, leaning forward. A glass toppled, shattered. Silence cracked like thunder after rain. Margaret didn't blink, didn't flinch, only placed a single letter on the table. Yellowed edges. Handwritten. Shaking Margaret Carter's composure more than any shout ever could. "It was never about winning," Margaret said softly. "It was about justice." Outside, the wind stirred, carried the faint rustle of fall leaves brushing against the windows. The letter, it told another story, one buried deep, one Margaret Carter tried so hard to keep hidden, decades old, truths about her family, where they really came from, what they'd done to climb. Gasps echoed, not loud, just enough. Kenneth stepped back, face pale. "Miss Foster, she showed us who she is," Margaret said evenly. "Now everyone knows." Margaret Carter's world tilted. No more smiles at Riverside Social Club, no more handshakes over cocktails. That kind of power? Gone. Would you lose sleep knowing your past defined your future? For Margaret Carter, it already had. She turned without another word, heels clicking sharply against marble floors, fading into quiet. And consequence. Inside, Margaret exhaled. This wasn't revenge, it was truth finally given space to breathe. The firm teetered on the edge for months. Helen fought for what mattered. Not profits, but peace and respect. She pulled her capital, sought new partners. Only stayed when Margaret Carter vanished from every boardroom, every decision. Kenneth changed too. Mandated training, real accountability. Catherine and James drove off, their laughter real, unshaken, the drama behind them. Helen watched them go. A quiet smile crossed her lips. This wasn't revenge, it was truth finally breathing free. Let them build their life with love. Not legacy, not looks, not luck, just heart and dignity. No more whispers behind fans at Riverside Social Club. No more icy stares over canapes. Margaret Carter's influence? Gone. Would you sleep well knowing your mask had slipped? Knowing everyone saw who you really were? Helen didn't need applause, only justice, and maybe a little self-respect. She stood tall in the hush that followed, her hands steady, her reflection strong, not broken, not bowed, but proud. Inside, a soft sigh, like wind through a flower garden, like rain rinsing away old pain. Victory didn't shout. It simply endured.